Oh, yeah.
Welcome back, everyone. We are very lucky to be joined by Rebecca and John from Tax to talk about the streamlined sales tax. I think we all had a few questions last time we talked about it, but yeah. The floor is yours, Rebecca. Please help us understand, or John, whichever of you, to please help us understand this whole wild thing we do.
Sure, absolutely. Rebecca Samaroff, Deputy Commissioner, Department of Taxes, for the record. I'll just give a brief background and then kick it to my colleague, John Gordikowski, who's a policy analyst with us at the Department of Taxes and also serves as Vermont delegate to the Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board. I'll just make a small recruitment plug here, which is that while Vermont has one vote on the board, we can have more than one delegate. And in the past, we have had a legislative delegate as well. Representative Young supported the department as a delegate in the past. And if anyone feels captivated by this topic, John or I would love to talk to you about perhaps becoming a delegate along with John. Could be as involved or uninvolved as you'd like at that point. So we'll learn more about that too. So yeah, I just wanted to give some context to kind of what the world was like when Streamline came into existence. It's been around since 2002 and emerged as a joint project from the National Governors Association and the National Congress for State Legislatures. And the aim was to improve uniformity and administrative ease for sales and use tax administration. And there was definitely a focus at that point on considering retailers that operate across multiple states, but with the goal of improving the whole sales and use tax experience for all sellers, all types of commerce. So the context here was, this was like pre-Wayfair decision. So the latest input from the Superior Court was that basically it was an undue burden constitutionally to require sellers to collect and remit sales tax if they didn't have a physical presence in the state. So that's kind of like where things were at. Multi-state retailers who did have filing requirements in multiple states faced a pretty cumbersome compliance environment with like a wide variety of tax laws, definitions like regarding taxability, different types of sales and use tax returns and different nexus rules across the different states. And then of course the states were struggling too, because states were seeing a significant revenue loss from a combination of like the massive growth, which was beginning of e-commerce and limited ability to collect revenue on those sales. We were pretty limited to individual consumers reporting use tax to the states for items that they weren't charged sales tax on, which is an area of voluntary reporting that's traditionally been pretty low. And then meanwhile, of course, brick and mortar vendors were also struggling at a competitive disadvantage because they were absolutely required to be collecting and remitting tax on those sales. So those were dark times before Streamline, and that's kind of the conditioning environment. So now that we know why is Streamline, I can kick it to John to explain a little more about what is Streamline.
Hello, good morning. For the record, John Gordikowski, tax policy analyst, Vermont Department of Taxes. As Rebecca mentioned, I've been the delegate from the tax department on Streamline for about 5-6 years now, something like that. And so Streamline it's an organization. It employs, I think, 5 staff full time. I could be wrong about that, including Craig Johnson, who is its executive director. And like how Rebecca just provided a plug, I'll give a plug for Craig as well. He is more than willing to discuss Streamline or any issues with Streamline with legislative committees, with individual representatives. He's very accessible to everyone, basically. So if anybody's ever interested in speaking to him directly or having him testify, he is more than willing to. Nobody can really explain or talk about Streamline better than Craig. But anyway, so the idea of streamlining, when I explain this to people, it's kind of like a treaty that the states have entered into. It's it can't tell the states what to do, but it's kind of like this commitment that the states sign up for that say, hey, we're gonna play by these rules that are uniform, that this group of states are all going to play by, and as long as we do this, we can get a centralized registration system for remote sellers at this point, and they are going to remit on a monthly basis, the taxes that they collect to us and to the other streamlined states. It basically greatly simplifies for a lot of remote sellers out there compliance, not just in Vermont, but in the 23 full member states, and the Northeast states that are full member states are Vermont, Rhode Island, and New Jersey. And we do have a map, but I'm not sure if it made it over yet, of all the states that are full members.
I have the map.
Oh, you do? Great.
Great.
Okay. Yeah, so there's a couple states out there that don't collect sales tax at all. So actually, I think it's kind of safe to say of all the states that collect sales tax, a majority of the states are full members of Streamline at this point. So what I do on Streamline as a delegate, so I'm a delegate to the governing board, and the governing board consists of all the states that are full member states. And basically we get to vote, and we get one vote, as Rebecca mentioned, on every issue that comes across. So if they're altering the agreement at all, if they're, I'm trying to think of if we're sanctioning another state for not complying with the agreement, those are the sorts of things that the governing board votes on. It is also participates in all the discussions about issues that are coming up. If there's issues that sellers are coming across, we discuss them at these meetings. If there's a committee if they decide to have a committee, a subgroup that maybe researches a new product, like a few years ago, they were researching breast pumps and providing like a definition of that. And if they do something like that, they allow the states to participate in the committees if they want. We don't typically participate. However, they are starting a cannabis group, or they have been now for a couple of years, where they kind of want to, collect some information about legalization of cannabis. And they asked us to participate due to our experience legalizing it. So even though that committee hasn't started yet, I believe I am on it. But those are just, they're not mandatory joining the committees. It does increase our say on different issues if we participate.
Can you give me an example of like a controversial issue that might be helpful to have Vermont representation discussing?
Sure. Right now there's back and forth with the business advisory council. And it's basically they're having a hard time obtaining anything more than a 5-digit zip code from some sellers. And if you think about the way people buy things now on their phones, it's like single click, the credit card's saved in there already. So what happens with Streamline, though, is there are all these rules about how to know when you're sourcing a product to a destination, what information is best, what you have to source. So what's happening now is a lot of sellers are saying the information that would be best for us to source, we're not obtaining from our purchasers. And that's a problem for us. And we would like to figure out a path forward if sales continue to become faster and we get less and less information from the purchaser. So that's like one type of thing that, and again, as e-commerce is evolving, you could see why that would be an issue. They're not, in other words, maybe not Apple. Apple would be too big probably, but some online seller is having a hard time determining whether or not a purchaser in Vermont is in Waterbury or is in Barrie, and one might have a local option tax and one might not. And that's a big deal. It's 1%, and everybody's trying to get it right, and so it's things like that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, thank you.
Sure.
I'm just trying to make this sound really exciting for the committee.
I get it. I'm trying to think of something that's a little bit more exciting than that, but that's been the one recently that kind of discussing like what what's the word for it? It's like what due diligence the sellers have to go through to sort of get the liability relief that they're looking for, which the liability relief meaning that they've tried to do their best and maybe they came up a little short, but because they can point to all these steps that they did, we might like waive penalty and interest or something like that, on a collection. So anyway, that's an example of an issue that's being discussed now.
So when the association decides to levy a penalty, where does the penalty money go?
Oh, well, it's just when we collect, it's just like any other tax, penalty and interest on owed taxes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it would be like any other seller or any other taxpayer. So anyway, Rebecca mentioned Wayfair. I think I'm just going to digress for a few minutes and just give just a little, I guess, history lesson on this stuff of like why the landscape has changed so much and what the future of Streamline kind of looks like at this point. So the Wayfair decision in 2018, I believe it was a big deal in the sales tax world. It really kind of turned it upside down on its head. For years, the Supreme Court had said from the 1960s all the way into the 1990s that it was unconstitutional for a state to require a seller to collect and remit sales tax into that state if that seller had anything less than physical presence in that state. And basically, the Supreme Court said that it was that there was an undue burden and that was violated due process. And states hated it, especially as e-commerce continued to develop, like into the 90s, into the aughts, and it became such a large section of the economy. And about that time, 2002, like Rebecca said, Streamline was created in an effort to sort of get more of these growing businesses that might have physical presence now in states, but maybe don't, to sort of comply with more states by making it easier on them to, for lack of a better word, just click one button and pay all the states that they might owe liability to. And so Streamline was developed, and sometime along the line, we decided to join it. I think it was like 2007, 2008, maybe we started changing our laws to sort of match the Streamline agreement language. And a lot of our current law is taken from the Streamline agreement. Everything from like sales price to retail sale, to even like what it means to lease or rent something, like that's all taken from Streamline. So anyway, but what happened in 2018 is after years, the Supreme Court finally re-examined that 1992 decision, Quill, and said, we said back in 92 that, lacking physical presence was an undue burden, but we don't think that's an undue burden anymore. But they won't say what an undue burden is. What they do then is they say physical presence doesn't, make a law unconstitutional, and they remanded it back to the lower courts to kind of decide what an undue burden is. So in some ways it was helpful because, physical presence is gone. But it wasn't helpful from that. Like it didn't say going forward what's crossing the line for states. But what it did do in what they call dicta in a Supreme Court decision, what that means is that it's kind of like a Supreme Court justice waxing poetic a little bit and not really giving information to the holding, but kind of just putting something else out there that doesn't necessarily need to be followed in future cases. But a lot of times they kind of look at it and they say, oh, this was important in this decision. And what they say in dicta is that the South Dakota law has three things in it that probably make it okay. That is clearly that South Dakota is trying to reduce the undue burden on these remote sellers that don't have physical presence. And what it identified was the sales thresholds of the South Dakota law, which are the same sales thresholds we have in Vermont, which is the $100,000 worth of sales in a year or 200 separate sales in a year. That's where everybody and a lot of other states have those thresholds at that point. They kind of sprung into effect as soon as Wayfair decision came down. Everybody was kind of waiting for it. So those thresholds make it unlikely that there's undue burden. The fact that the law wasn't retroactive made it likely that it wasn't undue. And the third thing that Supreme Court identified in that Wayfair decision of a reason why the law wasn't likely undue is South Dakota's membership in Streamline. So that kind of changed the whole game for Streamline. Suddenly now they were mentioned in the Supreme Court case saying like why remote sellers have to give to the states, have to collect and remit. So suddenly now you have all of these remote sellers that previously didn't have to collect and remit sales tax because they had no physical presence in any of these states. But now suddenly they have to because all these states have these thresholds. So the membership in Streamline, no, not membership, but registrations for Streamline, like increased exponentially after 2018. Basically every remote seller ran to Streamline and started going through Streamline to collect and remit for at least the 23 states that are in Streamline. That kind of, I think that goes over most of that. I see, apparently Streamline has about 23,000 registrants as of 2022.
And a registrant is someone who sells stuff?
Yeah, somebody who sells stuff who is registered with Streamline to sort of remit sales tax through Streamline, through the system. And I'll get to that in a sec, the system. But, Craig Johnson likes to say in the meetings, and it's true to some extent, that every new registration is a new cash flow to each state. It's a new annuity, basically, the state is getting because, somebody is identifying themselves as, hey, I make sales that are remote and I probably exceed the thresholds in these states. And for now on, every month, I'm going to remit sales tax to these states. That's not necessarily saying that we weren't getting sales tax from them to begin with, or that there weren't people in Vermont that were purchasing from these sellers that were remitting use tax. But like Rebecca was saying, we've had compliance issues, especially with the use tax. So you can kind of look at it as it's an annuity going forward, and it's probably money that wasn't there before.
And so that's one of the clear benefits to us of joining Streamline. In terms of the responsibilities, I just want to make sure that I understand it. It sounds like we get to tax or not tax, whatever we sort of choose as a body. But the definition that we use for whatever the thing is that we tax, we need to take from Streamline. So we can tax candy or not tax candy, but we have to use the definition of candy from the Streamline Association. Is that?
Yes, that is one of the uniformity aspects of the agreement. It doesn't define every product. It has about 6 categories where it provides definitions. And the categories, let me see, I have them written down. It's clothing, it's food and food. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, it's clothing, it's computer related products, it's digital products, it's food and food products, it's healthcare products, and it's telecommunication products. And again, even in those categories, it's not like they provide a definition for every single everything. Like it's not all defined. There's still a lot of things that, if we came up with a definition for,
And if one of us decided to join you in serving, would we get to help craft those definitions of those products?
Yeah, like I mentioned, yes.
Once a day.
Sounds so fun.
Representative Maslin has.
Nice to see you guys. If I look at the screen, it looks like I'm looking in outer space, so I'm going to look at the camera, maybe that a little bit better. One of the things that Ways and Means has talked about periodically is there are, some of us anyway, interest of taxing candy because in some of us believe anyway it's not food. But we understand the problem with flour. So the question that we've asked periodically in committee, but haven't asked you guys directly is, would we get kicked out of sales tax, out of Streamline if we tried a workaround so that we could tax candy that has, like Kit Kats that have flour in the product? Just in a sentence, sir, some of us find the definition of candy annoying. in colloquial terms. Thank you.
Sure. And I think Streamline readily admits that there's a few definitions that are kind of quirky, and cites the flower in the candy as an example. But to answer your question, yes, that what they wouldn't kick us out, but what they would do is they'd find us in non-compliance with the agreement. And it's substantial non-compliance, not even just non-compliance, but substantial non-compliance is the term. And what that would basically mean is they would identify that our laws have diverged from the terms of the agreement in just one way, which maybe would be the definition of candy. And then it would go at one of the meetings, it would go in front of the governing board, and all the other states would vote to hold us, to find us not in substantial compliance. And then we would basically lose our vote at the governing board. We wouldn't be able to vote. We wouldn't be able to participate the same way that we currently participate, or going forward would participate, as you were saying, kind of participating in these committees to come up with new terms, things like that. We would essentially lose our voice. One of the questions that's kind of outgoing is, and people ask, and I don't really have an answer to this, is what happened? Because the idea with, non-compliance is that the states work back towards that. A non-compliance would be kind of like an accidental thing, and that the states are working towards getting back into compliance. But it does seem like a couple of states are currently in like a standoff on a few issues that, I don't know what their path forward is. And it seems like Streamline is sort of grappling with that as well. What a long-term, non-compliance that's not going to get any better and perhaps just getting worse. So the short answer to your question, Representative, is yes, we would not be in compliance. That wouldn't necessarily mean that they kick us out, but I don't know long-term what the path forward would be, or what the outcome would be. Maybe that's something that if Craig Johnson were here or testifying, he could give you a little bit more on.
It's one thing to lose our vote. It would be another to lose any financial benefit for being part of Streamlined. I guess we can debate in the committee what we're more concerned about. I would be reluctant to give up financial return to Vermont if we decided we want to tax Kit Kats, but maybe this is going to be a further discussion, but I just want to put that idea in front of you. Thank you.
Representative Andrews.
Would maybe better path forward, or maybe not, be for us to direct you as our Streamline representative to advocate for changes to the definition of candy in the Streamline agreement? Is that part of your representation on the board?
I could, I guess, bring it up. I have direct.
I'm not saying you should go next week and do that. I'm just asking if that would be a path forward.
No, maybe. At this point, I know that they recently changed something in candy. I forget what exactly, but they created what they call a toggle, which is it allows you to kind of change a phrase in it if you want, or I forget, it was something about artificial sweeteners, I think they just changed. So it is possible to sort of engage, Streamline, and to go through the committees and to go through all of the discussions and come up with a change to a term or something, and create that option. It is possible. I don't know what sort of undertaking that would be. I don't know if they would listen to me. I don't know how many states you need. I don't know how many states you need.
I think my recommendation here would be that would be a great reason to have a legislative,
Right.
member representing. the interests of the
I felt that
Say that?
Yeah.
Because honestly, and I've said this to Rebecca before, I try to stay out of the legislative policy making part of should this word be here, or is this the right phrase we want to use for this type of product? I stay out of, because I'm an administrator in the executive branch. I don't really look at myself as having a part in that race. But yes, I think a lot of the other states have a senator or a representative in Streamline, and they discuss those sort of things. Yeah.
I appreciate that, John. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if we were to have a legislative member in Streamline, how often would they meet?
Well, so we have an annual meeting that's twice a year. I think it's usually in May and in October or November, I want to say. It's sometime in the fall. And the meeting goes for, the executive board meeting goes for, I think it's almost like a day, maybe a day and a half. And then the other groups meet. There's like subgroups. I forget what all the acronyms. There's CRIC and there's SLAC and all these other ones. And again, it's up to each state how much they wish to be in each group and how much they wish to contribute. So I think at the minimum, attending those two meetings would be the main things that a delegate would have to do. Like I said, that's usually when the governing board votes on different issues.
Once in the fall, and when's the other meeting?
It's I want to say it's early spring. It's like in May. It's sometime in May. I think it's usually the first week in May, but I'm not positive.
Meetings in nice places.
Yeah, they met in Jackson Hole a couple of years ago. Yeah, I kind of I was like, oh, I could but I've actually I've only ever attended them in person. There was one in Burlington a couple of years ago. They rotate between where they go with the different member states, and whatever. There's always a state that every year there's like a new I forget what they call it's like the president or something like that, and it's basically like a delegate from one state, and they rotate who it is. But whoever the delegate is, that state gets to host that year. That's usually how it works. So I forget where they might be going to one of the Carolinas, or maybe that was last year. I don't know. I always just attend remotely, so I don't know.
Thank you. Is there anything else you want to share with us about the agreement?
Let me just quickly go over.
I think it would be interesting for folks to hear just at least a little bit about how a retailer experiences being a Streamline member, which we can hit pretty quickly. I think it has like some nice overlap with some of the conversations we've been having about like the struggles of administering a local option tax. John, I know you were prepared to speak on that, and maybe say a couple points about that, and I'll just mention the benefits to our voluntary compliance from these guys from there.
Sure. So I'm again not trying to drop too many acronyms, but basically what happens is that Streamline itself, like I said, the organization is only 5 people. They have what they call a certified service provider, which is basically a company that acts as like a representative for sellers, that has programs that the board that Streamline certifies as these programs work and they do a good job, and they do a lot of testing to make sure they do. And so what happens if you're a remote seller, let's say, and you want to register with Streamline, is you register with Streamline and then you get a CSP. And I think there's like maybe 7 CSPs right now, but there's like 4 or 5 that are very frequent. And the other ones are just, they're not used as frequently, I think. And basically you would then get your selling system plugged into their automated system, their software. And their software would basically provides the sellers with categories of products and whether each state taxes that product or not. And that sort of tells and what the rates are that they're supposed to be taxing it at. And it lets the seller, once it's all hooked up, when the seller makes a transaction, it's all just automatic. And it, let's say they're selling a product into Chittenden County, they would get 6%. They would say, oh, this is a taxable product in Vermont. Let's say it was, I'm even having a hard time. Say it was a coffee mug. It's taxable into Vermont, and it's at 6% sales tax, and then the 1% local option, depending on whether or not it's to an address that's within like a local option municipality. But the software would just tell the seller, and it would all be automatic. And then what happens is the seller then remits that money to the CSP, who then once a month remits it to the states that have it. So that's in a nutshell how it works. It's very easy once there's an initial setup. It's very easy on our end, and it's very easy on their end. And I think that's
Sorry, interrupt you for a second, for a comment.
As a database programmer, I can kind of imagine the way this might work, where the seller is accessing your database of the codes and all the information on where which towns are taking lots and which aren't, and then using that information to calculate their taxes, if that's the way it works. So if we don't like the definition of candy and we're willing to put up with being not participating members, is the software capable of saying, when you buy candy in Vermont, you don't charge?
That's where it would kind of get messed up, which is why they don't it would mess up the system. I don't think it would be. That's where the compliance starts to get murky and it starts to get more complicated. And one of the reasons why Streamline doesn't really permit a divergence from what the definitions are, because they need these categories in the software products to be able to have the sellers hook up to the CSPs. So it would make the remote sale of candy into Vermont not work with the system, because our quirky our different definition wouldn't really be accounted for. They wouldn't really have a way to do it. And I think that's the underlying issue.
And there's pretty big trade-offs there, because like, as you know, these, e-commerce vendors are the types that the department would have the hardest time, finding through regular audit activities, since they don't have a footprint here in the state for us to lean on a withholding account or something like that. So like, from our perspective, you've heard both Craig and I say a number of times about the reliance on voluntary compliance in our system overall. And to that end, Streamline just makes this a real breeze for retailers, and not just like it's almost as if, these CSPs are vetted so thoroughly at the onset, and, the inputs they have are, like our rate and boundary file, which I've spoke to this group about in the past. And John actually creates this taxability matrix that breaks products down into categories as specific as rubber pants for kids 5 and under, which was like the funniest one I ever saw. But this is all like super vetted right at the onset. So it's almost like Vermont has pre-audited every single one of these vendors, like before, like we could just, like, the rest of it just flows through, because the CSPs are audited heavily by Streamline. The inputs are, very carefully constructed at the department. We know that's all flowing through their system that way. So it's like, it's pretty great payoff in the world of e-commerce for sure.
And I just, again, like, my background is, I'm a lawyer, so I'm always thinking about the constitutionality of things. It's like one of the things that keeps me awake at night, I guess. And and so anyway, there are national organizations that kind of, because this question of what is an undue burden and when do states go too far, it's still out there. It's not like the issues in Wayfair are gone, that just going forward, states are always going to be able to make every remote seller collect and remit sales tax for every sale that they make into the state. There are a lot of people that are spending a lot of time and a lot of money figuring out ways to challenge these things. And so there's a lot of national organizations that kind of give ratings to, like, which state is the easiest to challenge versus which state would be the hardest to challenge. And it always makes me happy when I see the map in Vermont is rated amongst the lowest of challenge-worthy states when it comes to undue burden. And a lot of that is because we have the South Dakota thresholds, and that we are in Streamline.
Representative Anthony, did you?
Yes, a question for tax. Is it possible for you folks to put a number if we opted out for candy? Could you put a number on the additional audit and administrative burden for not only bricks and mortar folks in Vermont, but also remote sellers who literally ship in candy in one form or another?
And I just want to clarify, I have no interest in like taxing a different version of candy or maybe even taxing candy at all. I just used it as an example that felt tangible. So I feel like we've all gone very deep on that example. I did not start any great movement here.
I think that would be hard to quantify. And I would want to learn more about like kind of what exactly we give up there in changing the definition. I think that there is some, we give up some ability for us to even do compliance work on a vendor like that, because if they're, if we've committed to using this process and they've committed to using their CSP, which is doing all these returns for all the states at once in an automated way, they can't make that adjustment to meet our tax law. And I'm pretty sure our ability to do compliance work, like, charge, say like have a finding like, oh, you didn't charge sales tax on this candy properly, gets curtailed by our membership in Streamline. But I'm going to learn more about this in case this candy conversation continues, or for any, for any product we want to deviate on. We might be also giving up our ability to do compliance on that product.
Well, they're welcome to sit on the other side of the room. There are benches over there. Yeah, go ahead.
When the CSP actually pays the tax, is it the CSP that pays the tax, or is it Streamline that actually sends it to the state?
The CSP.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Or yeah, the CSP remits the return, and I think the vendor might make the direct payment. John, maybe I don't know if the vendor pays the CSP to Vermont or the CSP remits the return and the vendor makes the payment to Vermont. One of those two things.
I thought it was the CSP, but I could be wrong.
Mm-hmm. They're a team. They're a well-oiled machine. We can't even tell them apart.
Any questions from anyone? Yeah.
I just want to make a comment. I know that the Ways and Means Committee in its different configurations has struggled with this candy taxing question for at least 2 decades that I've been involved. And it never works out. So don't panic. Don't think this is a thing going to happen tomorrow. It may happen, but I don't think so.
Thank you, Representative Brandon.
Too many difficulties. Representative Maslin is not the only one that wishes we could tax candy. So do I. I paid endless dental bills when my kids were all growing up, there's Halloween and all that. But if we taxed candy, I think we would somehow direct taxpayer behavior, but we can't do it. So don't panic.
And I want to say again, for the record, I was not proposing anything. It just seemed an easier example than menstrual products, which was the other one available in my mind. I think this all feels very abstract until we start talking about a specific object.
Totally.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with you today. We really hope to find a legislator to join you soon. And
How many, Jim?
we'll see you then. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We're gonna take a